The salt wind off the cliffs of Marwen carried the scent of jasmine and burning oil that night, and every wolf in the kingdom had come to watch a woman be given away. Kiana stood at the head of the marble pavilion with her wrists bound in silver cord, the traditional binding of a daughter promised. The cord was not cruel, it was ceremonial, woven by her own grandmother 40 years before, and it pressed against her skin with the weight of every woman in her bloodline who had stood in this exact place. The crowd below filled the open amphitheater of the cliffside city. Thousands of faces turned upward, their breath misting in the cold sea air. Lanterns of blue glass hung from the ancient olive trees, and every lantern held a single flame. She had been told she would feel honored. She felt nothing of the kind. Her father, Lord Hadrian of House Selverin, stood at her left shoulder, his hand gripping her elbow with a pressure that warned her not to falter. Beside him stood the High Speaker of the Council, a woman whose ceremonial robes dragged across the marble like spilled ink. And in the center of the pavilion, on a raised step of polished black stone, stood the man she was being promised to, Varric Thorn, Alpha of the Iron Coast. He was handsome in the way a blade was handsome, all sharp lines and dangerous purpose. His pack had pressed against her father's borders for 2 generations, and the alliance forming tonight would end that pressure. Her father had explained it to her many times. Her marriage was peace. Her marriage was prosperity. Her marriage was the future of 300,000 wolves who would never know her name. Varric smiled at her now, the kind of smile a man gives a possession he has paid a great deal for. His eyes were the color of wet slate, and they did not reach her in any way that mattered. She forced herself to smile back. The High Speaker began the binding rites in the old tongue, her voice carrying out across the amphitheater. Beside Sayana, her younger sister Marisol watched with tears glittering on her cheeks, and Sayana wished, fiercely and selfishly, that her sister would stop crying. The tears would only make it harder. It was already so hard. The first stars had appeared above the sea by the time the High Speaker came to the central question, the one that bound a daughter's life to another house forever. Chiana had practiced the answer for months. Her father had drilled it into her during the long evenings in his study, his patience thinning with each repetition. She knew the words by heart. She knew the cadence. She knew exactly when to drop her gaze in the proper show of submission. Sayana of House Selverin, the High Speaker called out, do you accept the claim of the Iron Coast by mark and by oath before the gods who watch and the wolves who witness? Kiana drew a breath, and in that breath, a sound she did not expect rolled across the amphitheater. It was a horn. Not the silver alliance horns her father had ordered to mark the ceremony. Something deeper. Something older. The sound came from the high northern road, and it was answered by a second horn, and then a third, until the cliffside echoed with calls that no one in the crowd had heard in living memory. The royal horns. A murmur rose through the gathered wolves. Heads turned, lanterns swung in the rising wind. Her father's grip on her elbow tightened so hard she felt the bone groan. "What is this?" Lord Hadrian hissed through his teeth. The High Speaker lifted her hands for silence, her face pale beneath the painted lines of her office. Varric had stepped forward, his shoulders tight, and Sayana watched his hand drift toward the ceremonial dagger at his hip. The doors at the far end of the amphitheater opened. He came in alone. Chayana had seen the Alpha King twice before in her life, once at her presentation when she was 16, once at the Autumn Council when she was 20. She remembered him as tall. She remembered him as quiet in a way that made the air feel heavy. She did not remember him looking at her, not directly. Not the way he was looking now as he walked the long marble path toward the pavilion with his cloak the color of midnight trailing behind him. His name was Cael Vanrith. He had ruled for 9 years. He had never married. He climbed the pavilion steps without breaking stride, and Lord Hadrian finally released her elbow to bow, the bow shallow and reluctant. The High Speaker performed her own bow more deeply. Varric did not bow at all. He had drawn himself up to his full height, and his hand had closed fully around the hilt of the dagger, and Sayana realized with a cold clarity that something had gone very wrong in the careful arrangement of her life. Kale's eyes found hers. She had never seen eyes that color before. They were the gray gold of a winter sea at sunrise, and they held her with an intensity that made the silver cord around her wrists feel like nothing. He stopped 3 paces from her. He did not look at Varric. He did not look at her father. He looked only at her, and when he spoke, his voice carried to the farthest edges of the amphitheater. "Stop the rites." The high speaker froze with her hands still raised. "My king," Lord Hadron began, his voice straining toward composure. "This ceremony was sanctioned by the Council of the Coast. It carries the seal of the Southern Pax. With every respect, you cannot simply—" "I can," Kale said quietly. "And I am." Varric stepped forward, his slate eyes blazing now. "You overreach, Alpha King. This is a daughter freely given. There is no royal interest here." Kale did not turn his head. His eyes stayed on Kayana. "There is every royal interest here," he said. "Ask her." The amphitheater held its breath. Kayana's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her wrists, in the bones of her ankles. She did not understand what was happening. She did not understand why the Alpha King had ridden through the night to interrupt a ceremony he had not been invited to. She did not understand why he was looking at her as if he had been searching for her in every face he had passed for years. Her father turned to her. "Kayana, tell the king you are honored to accept the alliance. Tell him." "Ask her," Kale said again, softer this time. "Ask her with no hand on her arm." Lord Hadron's face went white with rage, but he stepped back. He had no choice. To refuse a direct command from the Alpha King in front of 1,000 witnesses would be treason, and her father had spent his life avoiding treason. The high speaker swallowed and lifted her voice once more. "Sayana of House Selvarin, do you accept the claim of the Iron Coast?" Sayana opened her mouth. The answer she had practiced for months rose to her tongue, the answer that would make her father proud, the answer that would seal the peace. She looked at Varric Thorn. She looked at the slate eyes that did not reach her. She looked at the smile that had nothing of warmth in it. She looked at Cale Van Rith. He was waiting. He was not commanding her. He was not pulling her. He was only standing there with his cloak heavy on his shoulders, and his strange winter eyes fixed on her face. And she understood, in a way she could not have explained, that whatever she said next would be the first true word she had ever spoken in her life. "No," she whispered. The amphitheater erupted. Lord Hadron lunged for her arm. Varric drew his dagger. The high speaker shouted for order, and through it all, Cale Van Rith stepped forward and put himself between Kayana and every man on the pavilion, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "She chooses me." The world stopped. Kayana's bound wrists trembled. Her father was screaming something, but she could not hear the words. Varric's dagger had not yet found a target, but his eyes had gone the color of a coming storm, and Kyle had not moved an inch. He stood between her and all of them with his hands open at his sides, and he said it again, slower, for every wolf in the amphitheater to hear. "She chooses me, and I claim her, by ancient right, before the gods who watch and the wolves who witness." Kayana felt something inside her chest break open. It was not a clean break. It was the kind of break that lets in light and pain in the same moment, the kind of break that cannot be undone. She did not know this man. She did not know why he had come. She did not know what she had just done to her family, her sister, her father's careful peace. But she knew, with a certainty that made her knees weak, that the word no had been waiting in her chest for years. Cale turned to her then. He lifted one hand, palm up, the gesture of a wolf offering safe passage. He did not touch her. He waited. Behind her, her father roared. Behind her, Varric moved. Tayana put her bound hands into Cale's open palm. His fingers closed around her wrists, gentle, and the silver cord parted under his touch, as if it had never been more than thread. The crowd below the pavilion gasped. The high speaker stumbled backward. And as the cord fell to the marble floor, Kiana felt a heat bloom along the inside of her left wrist, a sudden warmth that had no source, a pulse that did not belong to her own heart. She looked up at Kale's face. His eyes had gone wide. He had felt it too. "What?" she breathed. "What was—" She did not finish the question. Varric's dagger came down. The next moments did not belong to her in any ordered way. She remembered Kale moving. She remembered the impossible speed of him, the way his body became a wall between her and the descending blade. She remembered the wet sound the dagger made when it found his shoulder instead of her chest, and the small, quiet exhale he gave that was not a cry of pain, but something closer to recognition, as if he had expected this. She remembered her father shouting her name. She remembered Varric being seized by two of Kale's guards, men in black who had moved up the pavilion steps so silently that no one had seen them come. She remembered the dagger being pulled from Kale's shoulder by his own hand, the slow press of his palm against the wound, the dark blood that ran between his fingers and did not seem to weaken him. And she remembered the way he turned to her, even bleeding, and asked, "Are you hurt?" She had not been hurt. She told him so. He nodded as if that was the only answer he needed, and then his guards were around them, and she was being moved down the marble path, away from the pavilion, away from her sister's tears and her father's fury, and the smell of jasmine and burning oil that she would never afterward be able to stand. By dawn, she was inside the walls of Hollow Reach. The royal city was not the city she had imagined. She had grown up on stories of high white towers and gardens that bloomed in every season, but Hollow Reach was a fortress, ancient and gray, built into the side of a mountain that overlooked the inland sea. Its corridors smelled of old stone and pine smoke. Its windows were narrow. Its silence was the silence of a place that had outlived many kings. She was given a chamber she was not allowed to leave. The chamber was beautiful. It had a window that looked out over the sea, and a bed wide enough for 3 people, and a writing desk made of dark wood polished by generations of hands. A fire burned in the hearth. A meal had been laid out. A young woman in plain gray robes had been waiting when Sayana arrived, and the young woman had introduced herself as Lyrian, attendant of the royal household, and had not asked any questions. Sayana ate nothing. She sat by the window and watched the gray sea move, and she pressed her left wrist against her cheek, and she tried to understand what had bloomed there in the moment Kale had touched her. The heat had not faded. It had quieted, but it had not faded. When she closed her eyes, she could feel it pulse, like a small, steady drum beneath her skin, and the rhythm of it was not her rhythm. It was someone else's heart, beating against hers from a long distance away. She did not know what it meant. She only knew that her father, in 23 years of teaching her about the customs of wolves, had never once mentioned anything that felt like this. By the second night, she had a visitor. Kale came to her chamber alone. He knocked, which surprised her, and he waited for her to answer, which surprised her more. When she opened the door, he was wearing dark linen instead of ceremonial cloth, and his shoulder was bandaged beneath his shirt, and his strange winter eyes had circles under them as if he had not slept since he had brought her here. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside. He entered and went no further than the threshold. He did not sit. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, and he looked at the fire instead of at her. "You are not a prisoner," he said. "Then I may leave. You may not leave the city, not yet. But within these walls you go where you wish. I should have made that clear yesterday. I did not, and I am sorry." She had not expected an apology. "Why am I here?" she asked. He turned his head slightly, just enough for the firelight to catch his profile. "Because if I had left you on that pavilion, you would be dead by tomorrow. Lord Thorn would not. Lord Thorn already tried." His voice was very quiet. "And your father knew he would. The alliance was a cover. The marriage was a delivery. She felt the room tilt. She put her hand against the wall. Cale did not move toward her. He did not try to comfort her. He only waited. And when she had steadied herself, he went on in the same quiet voice. 3 months ago, I received intelligence that a coalition had formed in the southern coast. Lord Thorne, your father, and at least 4 other houses. They have been moving quietly against my throne for over a year. The marriage tonight was the final piece. Once you were bound to Thorne, your father's lands would have passed under his control upon your father's death, and your father is not in good health. Thorne would have controlled the entire southern coast within a year. With the southern coast, he would have the strength to march on Hollowreach. The only thing standing in his way was you. Me? She repeated. You. He turned to face her then. You did not know. No. I did not think you did. That is why I came myself. If you had said yes on that pavilion, I would have honored your choice. I would have lost the war in time, but I would have honored your choice. He paused. You said no. I said no, she said, and her voice did not sound like her own. Why? The question was gentle. She had not expected it to be gentle. She had expected him to demand a reason, the way her father had demanded reasons for everything she did. But Cale had asked it the way a man asks after a wound, carefully, in case the answer hurt. I do not know, she said. He nodded as if that was a perfectly good answer. You should sleep, he said. Lyrian will bring you breakfast in the morning. There is a library 2 corridors east of this chamber. The northern courtyard is yours. The chapel is yours. The kitchens, if you can bear the noise, are yours. The walls of the city, you may not pass yet. I will explain why when you are ready to hear it. He turned to go. Wait, she said. He stopped. My wrist, she said. Something happened. When you touched me, the cord broke and there was... His shoulders went very still. There was heat, she finished. There still is. For a long moment he did not turn around. Then he did, and she saw in his face an expression she could not name. It was not fear. It was not surprise. It was something older, something that looked almost like grief. I will tell you, he said, but not tonight. Tonight you are tired and your father has already taken too much of your life for one day. Tomorrow. Tell me now. Tomorrow, Teyana, I am asking. Please. It was the please that undid her. She had not heard the word from a man in many years. She nodded once. He left her chamber and closed the door very quietly behind him, and she stood in the middle of the room for a long time before she went to the bed and lay down without removing her clothes. She did not sleep. She lay in the dark and pressed her left wrist against her ribs, and the small steady drum of someone else's heart kept her company until the gray light of morning came in through the window. She did not see him the next day. Lyrian brought breakfast. Lyrian brought lunch. Lyrian brought the news that the king had been called to the council chamber at dawn and had not yet emerged. Teyana wandered the corridors of Hollowreach with the slow, careful steps of a woman testing the boundaries of a cage she could not yet see, and she learned the rhythm of the fortress. The guards bowed when she passed. The kitchen staff did not lift their eyes. The library was vast and dim and smelled of dried herbs, and she found a window seat there and curled into it and watched the snow begin to fall over the inland sea. It was in the library that she met the woman who would change everything. The woman was small and old and dressed in a scholar's gray. She came in with an armful of books and stopped in the doorway when she saw Teyana, and her face went so still that for a moment Teyana thought she had stopped breathing. Forgive me, the old woman said. I did not know the chamber was occupied. Please, Teyana said. Come in, I can leave. No, child, no, you stay. The old woman set her books down on a table and came closer, slowly, the way one approaches a bird that might fly. She stopped a respectful distance away and bowed her head. I am Maven. I am the keeper of the records here. I served the king's mother before. Before, Sayana repeated. Before she died. Maven's voice was very soft. Forgive me. May I see your hand? It was such a strange request that Sayana held out her hand without thinking. Maven did not touch her. She only looked, and her eyes went first to the inside of Sayana's left wrist, and her face did something complicated. Oh, Maven said. Oh, child. What? Has he told you? Has the king told you what you carry? Kiana's heart began to beat very fast. He said he would tell me today. He has not yet. Then I will not steal his telling. Maven stepped back. But child, listen to me. Whatever he tells you, however much of it sounds impossible, it is the truth. Do you understand? The king is a careful man. He does not say what he does not mean. Maven. And one more thing. The old woman's voice dropped lower. There are eyes in this fortress that do not belong to friends. I have served here for 60 years, and I have learned to feel them. Be careful what you say in any room with more than one door. Be careful what you write on any paper that does not burn. And if a woman comes to you with kind eyes and asks you to walk in the gardens, do not go. She bowed once and left the library before Sayana could ask another question. Chayana sat with her wrist against her ribs and did not move for a long time. That evening, the fire in her chamber went out. It should not have gone out. The wood had been freshly stacked. The embers banked the way Lyrian always banked them. But when Chayana came back from her wandering, the fire was dead, and the room was cold, and there was a single cut flower on her pillow. A black rose. The petals had been dipped in something that gleamed wet in the low light. She did not touch it. She backed out of the chamber and walked, with the careful slowness of a woman who has learned not to run, down the corridor to the stairs that led to the king's wing, and she found the first guard in black livery, and she said in a voice she barely recognized, "Take me to him. Now." The guard did not ask questions. He walked her through corridors she had not seen, past doors she had not been allowed to approach, up a flight of stairs lit by oil lamps in iron sconces. At the top of the stairs was a heavy door of black wood, and the guard knocked once and then twice more, and the door was opened by a man with the silver braid of a senior officer at his shoulder. "Captain Dorian," the guard said, his voice low. "The lady requested the king." Captain Dorian's eyes moved past the guard to Chayana, and whatever he saw in her face made him step aside immediately. "He is in the war room," he said. "Come." She followed him through an antechamber where 2 more guards stood, and through a second door, and into a long, narrow room lit by the orange light of a low fire. A great table dominated the center, covered in maps and small carved markers, and around the table stood 6 men in dark uniforms. They turned as one when she entered. Kyle was at the head of the table. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. His shoulder was still bandaged beneath the dark linen of his shirt. He had been bent over a map when she came in, but he straightened the moment he saw her face, and whatever he had been about to say to the men around him died in his throat. "Out," he said. The men did not hesitate. They left the room without a word, Captain Dorian last, the door closing softly behind him. Kale came around the table. "What happened?" he said. She told him about the rose. He listened without interrupting. His face did not change much, but his hands, which had been loose at his sides when she began, were closed into fists by the time she finished. He did not speak for a long moment after she stopped. He looked past her, at the door, at nothing, and when he spoke again, his voice was very level. "Captain Dorian." The captain came back into the room so quickly that Sayana suspected he had not moved far from the door. "The ladies' chamber," Kale said. Quietly. "Take Voss and Imren. The black rose stays where it is until we have searched the room in the corridor. No one touches it. No one enters that wing without my direct order until I say, 'Move.'" Captain Dorian was gone before Kale had finished speaking. Kale turned back to her. "You will not return to that chamber tonight," he said. "I am sorry. I should have... Stop apologizing. Her voice came out harder than she meant. Tell me what is happening. Tell me why I am here. Tell me what the rose meant. Tell me what you said you would tell me last night. Tell me everything, Kale, or I am walking out of this fortress and taking my chances on the road. He looked at her. She had never said his name aloud before. She did not know when she had decided to use it now, only that she had, and the using of it had changed the air between them in a way she could not undo. Sit down, he said, and his voice was gentle again. Please. There was a chair by the fire. She sat. He sat across from her, close enough that she could see the faint exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, and he placed his open hands on his knees as if to show her he carried nothing. The rose is a message, he said, an old one. It is a sign used by an order that has not been seen in this country for 70 years, the Order of the Hollow Crown. I have never heard of it. You would not have. Your father would not have spoken of it. The order was a brotherhood of assassins who served only the highest bidder. They were broken by the king before me, my mother's husband, in the wars of the long winter. We thought every member dead. The black rose was their calling card. They sent it to mark the next throat. The breath went out of her. And it was on my pillow. It was on your pillow. He was watching her face very carefully. Xiana. The order does not reform on its own. Someone is paying them. Someone with very deep coffers and a very specific grievance. Lord Thorne does not have the wealth. Your father does not either. This is older money. Older anger. Then who? I do not yet know, but I will. Tonight, I will. There are 3 houses in this kingdom with the depth of coin to wake the hollow crown, and by morning I will know which of them has been spending it. He paused. There is something else. She waited. You asked about your wrist, he said. About what happened when I touched the cord. Yes. He drew a slow breath. There are old things in our kind, Kayana. Older than any council. Older than any throne. Most wolves live their whole lives without ever encountering them. But sometimes, very rarely, a woman is born who carries a particular thread of light in her blood. The old word for it was Miria. The new word is moonbearer. It means she is one of those who can hold the silver light of the old moon in her hands and shape it. Healing, warding, binding. A few other things. That is not real, she said. It is very real. It is so rare that it has not been seen in this kingdom for almost 100 years. But the records exist. My grandmother's grandmother was one. My mother spent her life studying them. He paused again. When a moonbearer comes of age, she must be claimed by a true mate before her power fully wakes, or the power will tear her apart from the inside. The claiming does not have to be a marriage. It is older than marriage. It is recognition. It is the moment 2 souls who were meant to find each other actually do. The bond settles the silver light. Without it, the light burns the bearer hollow. She could not breathe. Kale, she said. When you put your hands in mine on the pavilion, he said, and the cord broke. I felt the bond settle. So did you. That is what the heat in your wrist is. That is what you are still feeling now. You are saying, I am saying I did not come to interrupt that ceremony for political reasons. I came because 3 weeks ago Maven came to my study with a record from the southern coast and a portrait of a young woman she had never met. And she told me what I am telling you now, and I rode for the cliffs the next morning. I am saying that when I walked onto that pavilion, I had never seen your face in waking life, but I had been finding you in dreams for 6 years. She put a hand over her mouth. I should have led with that, he said, very softly. I am sorry. I have done this badly. You have done nothing badly, she said, and her voice was wet and small and not her own. Kyle, 6 years. 6 years. I dreamed of a man with winter eyes, she said. I told my sister. I told no one else. I dreamed of him standing on a cliff above a dark sea. I dreamed of his voice. I never saw his face. You would not have. The dreams come without faces. We are not given faces until we meet. She lowered her hand. She looked at him. She looked at the man she had not known existed 72 hours ago, and the impossible heat in her wrist pulsed, and she understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that she had not chosen no on that pavilion because she had wanted to defy her father. She had chosen no because some part of her had already known. The door of the war room burst open. Captain Dorian stood in the doorway, and his face was the color of ash. "My king," he said. "The corridor. The ladies' chamber. Speak." The rose was poisoned. Imran brushed the petals before I could stop him. "He is alive, but barely. The poison is one of the old ones. We have a healer with him now." "Imran will live," Kyle said. It was not a question. "He will live." "But my king." "There is more." We searched the chamber. There was a second door we had not known of, a servant's passage behind the wardrobe. It had been used recently. Whoever left the rose entered through the kitchens and exited through the wall. We are searching the lower levels now. Kale was already standing. "Lock the kitchens. Lock the lower gates. Wake Maven. Wake the War Council. I want every face inside these walls accounted for by the second bell, and I want the master of the kitchens in my study before the third. Yes, my king." The captain was gone again. Kale turned to her. "You are not leaving my sight tonight," he said. "Not until we have every passage in this fortress closed and every face in it named. I am sorry. I know it is too much. Too fast. I know I am asking you to trust a man you barely know on the word of a wrist that is still warm. But Sayana, whoever sent that rose did not send it to frighten you. They sent it to kill you. And the only reason it failed is that you came to me." "Kyle?" "Yes. The dreams," she said. "On the cliff, above the dark sea. Were you ever the one standing? Or was I?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You," he said. "You were always the one standing. I was the one climbing." She closed her eyes. The heat in her wrist beat steadily against her skin, the small drum of a heart that was not hers. And somewhere in the lower levels of the fortress, men in black livery were searching for a killer who had walked through a wall. She opened her eyes. "Then climb faster," she said. They did not sleep that night. Kyle moved her to a chamber on the upper floor of his own wing, a room with one door and one window, and a guard outside both, and he stayed in the antechamber that adjoined it. Sayana sat in a chair by the new fire and listened to the muffled voices through the wall. Captains came and went. Maven came and went twice. Once, near the third bell, she heard a woman's voice she did not recognize, sharp and angry, and then Kale's voice answering her in tones too low to catch. And then the woman's voice again, lower now, and the antechamber door closing. Toward dawn, the noise quieted. She must have dozed in the chair because when she opened her eyes, the fire had burned down to coals, and a gray light was coming through the window, and Kale was sitting across from her in the chair he had used the night before. He was watching her. He had not slept either. "You should be in the bed," he said. "So should you." He almost smiled. "We have what we need. The master of the kitchens did not work alone. He named 2 others before he understood what we already knew. We have them in the lower keep. We will have a name by the noon bell. A name of who paid. A name of who paid, and where they are, and how many men they have inside these walls. I would like to give you peace by sundown. I do not know yet if I can." She studied him in the low light. The bandage at his shoulder had been changed. There were shadows under his eyes that had been deeper 12 hours ago, and his hair was damp, as if he had washed quickly somewhere between councils. He looked like a man who had been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time, and was only now, in the gray of the morning, beginning to set parts of it down. "Tell me about your mother," she said. He blinked. He had not expected the question. "Why?" Because Maven served her. Because you said your mother spent her life studying women like me. Because I am sitting in your fortress at the edge of an inland sea, and I do not know your mother's name, and that feels wrong to me." He was quiet for a long moment. "Her name was Eleanor," he said. "She was the daughter of a fishing house from the western coast. She had no business being a queen. She had no training for it. The old king saw her at a midsummer festival and refused to be turned aside, and her father gave her up for a treaty he had not asked for and did not want. She was 18. I came 2 years later." "Was she happy?" "No," he said simply. "She was not. But she was kind and she was clever, and she taught me to read in 3 languages before I was 7, and she spent every hour she could in the records room with Maven, looking for women like you. She had read of one when she was a girl. She thought, I think, that if she could find another one in her lifetime, she would have done something worth doing with the throne she had not asked for. She did not find one. She did not. She died the winter I turned 12. A fever. Nothing dramatic. Just a fever." He looked at the coals. "I have ruled for 9 years and I have not married. Maven understood why before I did. She told me, when I was 20, that I should stop trying to find a queen and let a queen find me. She said the dreams would come when they were ready. And they came? And they came?" He looked up at her. 6 years ago. The first was a winter night. You were standing on a black cliff above a sea I had never seen, and you were holding something in your hands that gave off light, and the light was silver, and you were laughing. I woke, and I could not get the laugh out of my head for 3 days. She felt the heat in her wrist pulse harder. "I do not remember laughing on a cliff," she said. "You will." He smiled, and the smile changed his whole face, and she understood for the first time that he was not a much older man than her, that he was perhaps 30, that the gravity in him had been carved by his crown and not by years. "We have time." A knock at the antechamber door. Cale did not move from his chair. He simply lifted his voice. "Enter." Captain Dorian came in. His uniform was different from the night before, fresh, and his face was no less grim. "My king, we have the name." Cale waited. "It is House Marvane." The fire popped. Kiana watched Cale's face. She did not know the name. She did not know what it meant. But she watched the muscle along his jaw tighten, and she watched his eyes go very still, and she understood that whatever House Marvane was, it was worse than House Thorn, and worse than her father combined. "Tell me you are sure," Cale said. "The kitchen's master named the steward. The steward named the cousin. The cousin had a Marvane signet sewn inside the lining of his coat. I have him in chains in the lower keep. He is not speaking yet, but he will." "Where are they currently in residence?" "My king." Captain Dorian hesitated. "The Lady Marvane arrived in Hollowreach 4 days ago for the Winter Council. She is in the south wing as we speak." The silence in the antechamber was complete. "Inside the walls," Kyle said. "Inside the walls. Dorian." Kyle's voice had not changed in volume, but something in it had cooled by 20 degrees. "How many guards on the south wing?" 6, my king. "Double them. Nothing announced. No alarms. I do not want her to know we know. I will come to the south wing in 1 hour." "Yes, my king." Dorian left. Kyle turned back to Sayana. "House Marvane," he said, "is a cousin house to mine. My mother's husband, the old king, had a younger sister who married into the Marvane line 3 generations ago. The Lady Marvane is therefore my second cousin. She has spent the last 15 years cultivating a quiet position on every council in this kingdom. She is 62 years old. She has the deepest coffers of any noble in the south. And she has, as best I can tell, considered herself the rightful heir to this throne since the day my mother arrived in Hollowreach. Your second cousin. My second cousin. She tried to have me killed in your house. She did." He was watching her very carefully now. "Sayana, there is something you should know before I go to her. I am not going to ask her if she did it. I already know. I am going to ask her who else is in this with her. And I am going to ask in a way that gets answers. I am asking you to stay here with Dorian's men until I return. I am asking you to trust that I will return. Why are you telling me this? Because the woman who stood on the pavilion 3 nights ago was not given a choice. I will not be that man to you. She stood. He stood with her, automatic, the courtesy of a man raised to it. I want to come with you, she said. Sayana. I want to look at her face. I want her to look at mine. I want her to know that the woman she sent the rose for is alive and standing in the same room, and she will not be frightened back into a chair. He looked at her for a long moment. That, he said, is not a request I can grant. Not because I do not respect it. Because if she has another knife in that wing and a willing hand, I cannot guarantee your safety, and I will not allow you to be the price of my pride. Then you go, and you come back. I go, and I come back. She stepped closer to him. She had not meant to. The heat in her wrist was pulsing in a rhythm that matched the slow, steady drum of his heartbeat across the small space between them, and she could feel it, his heart, as clearly as her own. Kale. Yes. Come back. He lifted his hand. He did not touch her. He held it open between them, the same gesture he had made on the pavilion. She put her wrist against his palm. The heat flared. Not painfully. Brightly, the way a flame brightens when wind moves through a window, and his eyes went a shade darker and his breath caught, and he closed his fingers around her wrist with a gentleness that made her want to cry. I will come back, he said. I have not climbed 6 years to lose you in a corridor. He left. She stood alone in the antechamber with her wrist still warm where he had held it, and she understood that something inside her had changed in the last 3 days that would not be changing back. He was gone for 2 hours. Dorian's men stood outside both doors, and Lyrian came with breakfast. Sayana did not eat, and the gray light at the window slowly turned the color of pale gold as the morning came on. She paced. She sat. She stood at the window and watched the inland sea move under a thin winter mist. Her wrist did not stop pulsing, and she found, after the first half hour, that if she closed her eyes and concentrated, she could feel not just the rhythm of his heart, but the shape of his breathing, slow and steady, and the fact that he was not afraid. He was angry. She could feel that. The anger was not loud. It was a banked thing, deep. The kind of anger a careful man builds over years. But under the anger he was steady, and the steadiness was for her. When the antechamber door opened, she was already moving toward it. He was not hurt. That was the first thing she saw. His shoulder was the shoulder of yesterday and not a fresh wound, and his face was tired but whole, and Dorian came in behind him with a small leather folio in his hands and a look of grim satisfaction. It is done, Kale said. She is in the lower keep. She named 4 houses. 3 I expected. 1 I did not. Which one? That can wait. There is something else first. He gestured to the table by the fire. Come, sit. We have an hour before the next council, and I want to give you that hour. She sat. He sat across from her. Dorian placed the folio on the table and stepped back to the door, and Kale did not open the folio. He only put his hand on it and looked at her. There is no easy way to say this part, he said. Your sister sent a rider yesterday. She went still. Marisol? Marisol. The rider arrived an hour ago. She is asking for permission to come to Hollow Reach. She says your father has locked her in the eastern wing of his estate. She says he has not let her speak to anyone since the night of the pavilion. She says she fears for your life and for her own. Is the rider trustworthy? The rider is one of mine. I had a man placed in your father's house 6 months ago, when this began. Marisol gave him a token only you would recognize. Dorian. Dorian opened the folio and removed something small. He crossed to the table and placed it in front of Sayana. It was a child's bracelet, woven copper threads, 3 small green stones, a clasp that had been broken and clumsily repaired with a piece of wire. Teyana had made it for her sister when she was 9 and her sister was 4, and her sister had worn it every day for years before she had been sent away to her aunt's house for schooling, and Teyana had not known her sister still owned it. She picked it up. Her hands were not entirely steady. "It is hers. I thought it might be." Kale's voice was very gentle. "Teyana, I will send for her if you wish it. I will send a company of 10, fast horses, and we will have her here in 3 days. But I will not send them without your word. She is your sister. The choice is yours." She looked at the bracelet in her palm. She thought of her sister's tears on the pavilion. She thought of her sister's face in the firelight when they had been girls. She thought of her father's grip on her elbow, and she thought of the kind of man who locks his younger daughter in a wing of his house when his older daughter slips the leash. "Send them," she said. "It is done. Today, now. Dorian." The captain bowed and left the room without another word. Kyle waited until the door had closed. "There is one more thing," he said, "and I will not leave it for tomorrow because you will hear it from someone else if I do, and I would rather you heard it from me." She set the bracelet carefully on the table. "Tell me. The 4th house, the one I did not expect." He paused. "It is House Selverin." For a moment she did not understand. Then she did, and the understanding moved through her in a slow, cold wave, and she put both hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. "My father. Your father. He has been corresponding with Lady Marvane for 4 years. The marriage to Thorn was not only Thorn's price, it was Marvane's payment. Your father agreed to deliver you to Thorn in exchange for Marvane's coin and Marvane's protection. He knew Thorn intended to kill you within the year. He knew. He knew. He knew." She did not cry. She had thought she might. She had thought a thing like this would crack a daughter open, but she only sat very still with her hands flat on the table and felt the heat in her wrist pulse steadily, steadily, and after a long moment she found she could speak. "Thank you for telling me. Teyana." "No. Thank you. I needed to know, and you told me. That is more than he ever did." She drew a breath. "Marisol." Marisol does not know. The writer was certain. He spoke to her at length. "She believes your father is a frightened man who has lost control of a marriage he agreed to. She does not know about the coin." "Good. Do not tell her when she comes. Let her have her father a little longer. Let me be the one to take him from her, when it is time." He looked at her with something in his eyes that she did not know how to name. "Yes," he said. "Of course." She turned her wrist over on the table. The faint warmth at the inside of it was visible now, if one knew to look. A pale silver shimmer just beneath the skin, like moonlight underwater. "Kale." "Yes. The thing inside me. The light. You said it has to settle or it will burn me hollow. How long do I have?" He hesitated. "Tell me the truth." "Maven says weeks," he said. "Possibly a month. The bond is recognized but not completed. Recognition slows the burn. Completion stops it. Without completion, the silver light will keep waking, a little more each day, until it wakes faster than your body can carry it. And completion is a claiming, mate to mate, mark for mark. It is a choice you make awake and willing in your own time. I will not ask you for it before you are ready. I would rather burn beside you than push you into a thing you have not chosen. You would burn beside me. I would burn beside you." She looked at him across the small table. She looked at the man she had known for 3 days, who had ridden through a winter night to a pavilion he had not been invited to, who had stepped between her and a blade and bled for it without complaint, who had told her about his mother in the gray of dawn because she had asked. "I will think on it," she said. "I will not make it fast." "But Kale." "Yes. It will not be no." He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the gray gold of them was a little brighter than it had been. "Thank you," he said. A bell rang, somewhere deeper in the fortress. A long bell, the kind rung for counsel. He stood. She stood with him. "I have to go," he said. "I will come back at sundown. Dorian will not leave this door. Lyrian will bring whatever you need. The library is yours. The northern courtyard is yours. The walls of the city, still, you may not pass. I am sorry. Go." He went. She sat back down at the table and picked up Marisol's bracelet, and she held it in her palm and watched the firelight catch in the small green stones, and she did not cry. She did not cry for a long time. Marisol did not arrive in 3 days. The company of 10 reached the Selverin estate on the second night, and what they found was a manor stripped of its banners, its gates unguarded, its eastern wing empty. Lord Hadron was gone. The household staff who remained told a confused story of a midnight order and a long line of carriages and a younger daughter weeping in the courtyard before being lifted into the last carriage by a woman in a gray cloak. A woman in a gray cloak. Dorian brought the report to Kale's study at the second bell of the morning, and Sayana was there when he gave it, because she had not left Kale's wing in 2 days. Kale read the report twice. He set it down. He looked at Dorian. "Marvain," Kale said. "Almost certainly, my king. The description of the cloak matches the household livery of her northern estate. She knew we would send for the sister. She moved before we arrived. By a day. Possibly less." Kyle was silent. The silence was the kind of silence that filled a room with weight. Kiana watched his hands flatten on the desk, palms down, and she watched the muscle along his jaw tighten and release once, and she felt, through the steady pulse in her wrist, the cold, deliberate fury that he was not letting touch his face. "Where?" she said. Both men looked at her. "Where would they take her?" she said. "If it was Marvain, where?" Kyle looked back at Dorian. "The northern estate." "My king, I would not stake my life, but yes. The northern estate is the most likely. It is the best fortified of her holdings. It is the deepest from our reach, and it is where she has held delicate matters in the past." "How long to reach it?" "Hard riding, 4 days. 5, with a company large enough to break a gate. Prepare 100. We leave at dawn." "Yes, my king." Dorian paused at the door. "My king. The Lady Kayana. She comes." It was not a question Kale asked her. It was a thing he said. Dorian inclined his head and left, and Kayana, who had braced herself for the argument, felt the bracing go out of her in a single breath. "You are not going to ask me to stay," she said. "I am not." "Why?" "Because you would come anyway. Because Marisol is your sister. Because I have learned in 72 hours that telling you what you may and may not do is not the way to keep you safe. It is only the way to make you climb out a window." "I would not climb out a window." "You would. I have seen women who would. And you would. You have spent 23 years being told what to do. I will not be the next mouth that does it." She did not know what to say. She had not been spoken to this way by a man before, and the strangeness of it sat in her chest like a small warm stone. They rode at dawn. She had been given winter clothes, heavy wool, fur at the collar, gloves thicker than any she had owned. She rode beside Kale at the head of the column, Dorian to her right, and behind them 100 wolves of the king's guard, half mounted, half in wolf form, moving in a loose protective ring around the riders. The road climbed. The day was cold and clear. By the second night they had reached the high country, and by the third they had crossed into the territory that bordered the northern estates of House Marvain. Maven had insisted on coming. Tiana had not understood why until the second evening when they had stopped at a forester's lodge to change horses, and Maven had drawn her aside in the lamplight and pressed a small bundle of dried herbs into her hand. "For the silver," Maven said quietly. "It will not stop the burn, but it will slow it, child, if it begins to wake faster than we thought." "Maven, how fast is fast?" fast enough that you should not be on a horse for 5 days, but you are on a horse for 5 days. So, the herbs, under the tongue, 3 pinches, no more in a day, or your heart will run. Sayana put the herbs in the inner pocket of her coat, against her ribs, and kissed Maven's lined cheek. And Maven had smiled in a way that was not entirely comforting. By the 4th day, she needed the herbs. The pulse in her wrist had begun to spread. Not painfully, not yet, but undeniably. She could feel it now in her ribs, in the hollow of her throat, in the small bones of her ankles. The silver shimmer beneath the skin of her wrist had become visible enough that she had begun keeping the cuff of her shirt pulled low. When she put a pinch of the dried herb under her tongue, the spread quieted, but it did not stop. And when she closed her eyes at night, she could feel the silver inside her like a slow tide rising against a shore. She did not tell Kale. She did not lie. She simply did not tell. He had enough on him. He rode at the head of the column with his face turned to the cold, and he sent scouts ahead at every fork, and he did not sleep more than 2 hours a night, and she would not put one more thing into his hands while his sister and her sister were in the same dark place ahead of them. On the 5th morning, the scouts came back. Dorian brought them to Kale, and Kale took the report standing in the snow beside his horse, and his face, when he turned to Sayana, told her everything before he opened his mouth. The northern estate is empty. Empty? Empty. The household has been gone for at least 2 days. The gates were left open. No bodies. No signs of struggle. They have moved her again. Where? That is the second part. Kale's voice was very level. There is a place above the estate, a high pass. An old keep called Hollow Reach's Echo. It is a watchtower from the long winter wars. It has been abandoned for 50 years. The scouts saw smoke. Smoke from an abandoned tower. Smoke from an abandoned tower. Kayana's wrist was pulsing harder. She could feel it in her teeth now. How far? Half a day's hard ride. We can be there before dark. Then we ride. He was already moving. They rode. The road climbed into the high pass, and the snow deepened, and the wind turned bitter. And by the time the broken silhouette of the keep appeared above them in the late afternoon light, Tayana's hands had begun to shake. She pretended it was the cold. Kyle was not looking at her. He was looking at the keep, at the thin line of smoke rising from one of its towers, at the small dark figures moving along its walls. They were waiting. "This is a trap," Dorian said quietly. "Yes," Kyle said, "my king." They took the sister to bring us here. They did not take the sister to keep her. They took the sister because Lady Marvane could not be sure her assassins would reach Sayana inside Hollow Reach, but she could be sure that Sayana would ride to a high pass for a sister. Then we should not. We should. We will. But we will not ride into a trap on their terms. Kale turned in his saddle. "Dorian, take 50 around the north slope, quietly. The keep has only one road in, but it has 3 old escape passages out. I want every one of them closed before we approach the gate." "Yes, my king." "Vas and Imran. Take 10 and find a high vantage. I want eyes on every wall." The captains moved. The column split. Kayana watched the dark shapes of the wolves of Kale's guard fan out into the snow and the trees, silent, swift, and she felt the silver inside her chest pulse so hard that for one terrible moment her vision narrowed to a small bright point. "Sayana." She blinked. Kale was looking at her. "You are pale." "I am cold." "You are pale, and your eyes are silver." She lifted her hand and touched her own face. "Maven," Kale said, not lifting his voice. The old woman appeared at his stirrup as if she had been waiting for the call. "It is waking," Maven said quietly. "I felt it begin 2 nights ago. I gave her herbs." "How long?" "Hours, my king, perhaps less if she is frightened. Perhaps more, if she is held." Kale looked at Sayana. He did not panic. She watched his face go through a thing she could not name and come out the other side composed, decided. "You will not enter that keep on a horse," he said. "You will enter it beside me, on foot, when I have cleared the path. Maven will stay with you. The herbs will hold." "Kale, Marisol is in there." "Marisol is in there. So are 40 men with bows, by Dorian's count, and at least one woman who paid the hollow crown for your head. You will not walk through that gate carrying a fire that might break before it has been set. You will walk through that gate beside the man who will set it. You said you would not tell me what to do." "I am not telling you what to do." His voice had gone quiet again, the quiet she was beginning to know. "I am asking. Kiana, I am asking. Wait for me to clear the road. 1 hour. Maven will be with you. Vas will be with you. Dorian's men will be on every slope. 1 hour." She looked at him. The pulse in her wrist had begun to feel like a bell. The silver shimmer beneath her skin had spread to the back of her hand. Her sister was inside that keep, or she was not. Her father, perhaps, was inside that keep. The woman who had sent the black rose was almost certainly inside that keep, sitting somewhere warm, waiting. 1 hour, she said. He bent down from his saddle. He did not kiss her. He pressed his forehead to hers briefly, and the heat in her wrist flared so hard she felt it in her teeth, and he straightened and turned his horse and rode for the gate. The hour passed. She watched from the trees with Maven at her shoulder and Vas behind her with his hand on his sword. She watched Kale's 100 move up the road in disciplined silence. She watched the wolves of his guard slip into the rocks above the gate. She watched arrows fall from the keep's walls and find shields and snow and 1 or 2 men. She watched the gate open because someone inside had opened it from within, an ally Kale had placed weeks before. And she watched the king of the wolves walk into a trap that had been set for her with his sword drawn and his face calm. Then the silver in her chest broke its banks. She felt it go. There was no decision to it. There was no warning Maven could have given that would have stopped it. The bell that had been ringing in her wrist for 5 days became a sound that filled her whole body, and the last thing she heard before her vision went white was Maven's voice, sharp and afraid for the first time since Kiana had met her, saying, "No, not yet, child, not yet." The silver took her. The white was not blindness. It was the opposite of blindness. It was the sense she had carried all her life of being only one woman in one body, breaking open into something larger. And for a long, terrible breath, Sayana could not tell where her skin ended and the world began. She could feel the cold of the snow at her ankles. She could feel the grain of the wood in the trees behind her. She could feel the small, frightened heart of a hare 200 paces away in the underbrush, and the older, slower heart of an owl in the high branches, and somewhere ahead of her, inside the broken walls of the keep, the steady, deliberate heart of the man she had agreed to wait 1 hour for. She could feel his heart. It was the only steady thing in the white. She found it the way a swimmer finds the surface by following the pull, and the pull led her forward, one stumbling step at a time, out of the trees, onto the snow road, toward the gate. "Child," Maven's voice, somewhere behind her. "Sayana, walk with me, do not run, the light will hold if you walk." She walked. Vas had drawn his sword. He moved beside her without speaking. The silver was visible now to anyone who looked, a soft pale glow at her hands and her throat, and the inside of her wrists, and the wolves of the king's guard who saw her coming up the road did not bow, but slowed, fell back, made a path. She walked through the open gate. The courtyard of the keep was full of fallen men. Some were Kale's. More were not. The fighting had moved into the great hall ahead of her, and she could hear the clash of steel against steel and the deeper sound of wolves at war, and through the bond, she could feel Kale's heart beating steady, steady, the heart of a man who had not been hurt yet and was working hard to keep it that way. She walked across the courtyard. A bowman appeared at a window above her. She felt him before she saw him, the small, sharp intent of him, the arrow drawn back, and she lifted her hand without thinking. The silver went out of her palm in a soft pulse. The arrow turned in the air as if a hand had caught it and set it gently aside, and the bowman fell back from the window with a cry, and Vas beside her made a low, astonished sound. "My lady." "Keep walking," Maven said. She kept walking. The doors of the great hall stood half open. She could see through them into a long, smoky room lit by torches, and she could see the shapes of men fighting near the far end, and she could see a smaller knot of figures on a raised stone dais, and on the dais, kneeling with her wrists tied and a blade at her throat, was Marisol. She was 18. She looked thinner than she had at the pavilion, paler, and her eyes were huge in her face, and the man holding the blade at her throat wore the dark wool of House Marvain. Beside him, in a chair carved from black wood, sat a woman. The woman was old in the way carved stone is old, hard and unweathered. Her hair was the color of pewter, plaited in the long braid of a noblewoman of the high country. She wore gray velvet and a single pendant of dark amber, and she was not looking at the fighting at the far end of the hall. She was looking at Sayana. Kayana stepped through the doors. The hall went quiet. Not all at once. The men nearest the door saw her first, and the silver light of her, and the news of her moved through the room the way fire moves through dry grass. By the time she had walked the long stone path to the foot of the dais, every blade in the hall had paused, and Cale was standing 30 paces away with his sword lowered and his eyes locked on her face. She did not look at him. She looked at Lady Marvain. "You sent the rose," Sayana said. Lady Marvain inclined her head. The gesture was almost gracious. "I sent the rose. You took my sister. I took your sister. You paid my father. I paid your father." A small smile. "Though I will say, he was the easiest of the four. He set his own price." "Let her go." "Ah." The old woman tilted her head. "And what would you give me, child, for a girl I have already paid for?" Chayana lifted her hand. The silver light in her palm gathered. She did not know how she knew to do it. The light came when she called, the way a hand comes to a held-out arm, and it pooled in her palm in a slow, steady glow that lit the pewter hair, and the dark amber pendant, and the small, terrified face of her sister kneeling beside the chair. "I will give you nothing," Chayana said. "I am not here to bargain. I am here to take her home." The man holding the blade at Marisol's throat pressed it harder. A bead of blood appeared along the edge of the steel. Marisol did not cry out. She closed her eyes. Something inside Sayana that had been holding its breath for 23 years let go. The silver did not pour from her hands. It came from her whole body. It came from the bones of her ankles and the small of her back, and the hollow of her throat, and the inside of her wrists, and it filled the hall in one slow, bright wave that did not burn the men of Kale's guard, but found, with the unerring sense of a thing that knew its own enemies, every blade and every arm, and every dark intent that meant her sister harm. The man holding the blade at Marisol's throat staggered back as if he had been struck. His knife fell from his hand and clattered down the dais steps. He did not fall, but his face went the color of old paper, and he stood swaying, the silver light wrapped around his wrist like a soft, bright cuff. Across the hall, 3 more Marvain men dropped their swords, then 4, then 6. Lady Marvain stood from her chair. "Child," she said, and her voice for the first time held something that was not amusement. "You do not know what you are doing. Sit down. Calm yourself. You will burn yourself out before the hour is up. I know what I am doing. You do not. You have not been trained. You have not been claimed. You will tear yourself apart from the inside, and the boy king will hold a corpse, and my men will rise from this floor when the silver leaves you, and we will be exactly where we were 10 minutes ago. Sit down." "Marisol," Chayana said, "stand up. Walk to me." Marisol opened her eyes. She looked at her sister. She looked at the silver light filling the hall. She rose slowly, with the careful steadiness of a girl who has been very brave for a long time, and she stepped down from the dais one stone at a time, and no hand reached to stop her. She walked to Sayana. She put her face into Sayana's shoulder. Sayana did not lower her hand. She held the silver in the air with her sister trembling against her ribs, and she looked up over Marisol's head at the old woman in the gray velvet, and she said, very quietly, "You should have left me on the pavilion." The silver flared. It did not strike Lady Marvane. It did not need to. It moved across the hall in a slow, patient sweep, and where it touched the men of House Marvane, they sank to their knees and dropped their blades and pressed their faces to the stone, and where it touched the binding cords on the prisoners along the back wall, the cords parted as the silver cord on the pavilion had parted. Soft, complete, the way a thing falls away when the reason for it has gone. And then the silver began to take her. She felt it. Maven had warned her. The light had a shape and a weight, and her body had not been prepared, and she could feel the edges of herself beginning to fray. Her knees softened. Her vision started to narrow. Marisol made a small, frightened sound against her shoulder, and from the far end of the hall, she heard footsteps. Fast, running, and the heart she had followed up the snow road was suddenly beside her. Tayana. Kale. His arms went around her. He took Marisol gently from her shoulder and passed her to Vas without looking, and he wrapped both arms around Sayana and held her up, and his face was very close to hers in the silver light. "Look at me." She looked. "You did it. She is safe. You did it. Now you have to come back. Do you hear me? You have to come back. Kale." Her voice was very far away. "It is so much." I know. Listen to me. You said it would not be no. Do you remember?" "I remember. I am asking now. Right now. Here. With your sister 3 paces away and your enemies on their knees and the hall watching. I am asking you to claim me. To let me claim you. Now, Kayana. Say yes." She did not have to think. She had thought for 5 days. She had thought on a horse in the snow with the silver rising against her ribs. She had thought every time her wrist had pulsed with the small, steady drum of his heart. "Yes," she said. He bent his head. He bared his throat to her, the old gesture, and she did not have her teeth as a wolf yet, but the silver knew. The light gathered at her mouth. She pressed her lips to the place where his pulse beat in his neck, and the silver poured from her into him, and she felt the bond settle the way a great door settles when it has finally found its frame. The silver did not stop. It changed. It moved through both of them now. She felt his heart not as a drum at a distance, but as a heart inside her own chest, and she felt his memories pour into her in a quiet flood. She saw his mother on a winter afternoon teaching him a word in a 3rd language. She saw a younger Maven pressing a small paper into his hand and saying, "Do not give up, my king. The dreams will come." She saw the first dream, the cliff above the dark sea, and the laugh that had stayed with him for 3 days. And he saw hers, the silver cord, the smell of jasmine and burning oil, the years of practiced answers, the small green bracelet she had made for a 4-year-old sister. The word no waiting in her chest like a folded letter. When she opened her eyes, the silver had quieted. It was still there. She could feel it in her wrist, in the hollow of her throat, but it was not breaking against her ribs anymore. It had a shape now. It had a place. It had been settled. She was still standing. Kyle was holding her. His forehead was against hers. His breath was uneven. The hall around them had gone very still. "My king." It was Dorian, somewhere behind Kale, and his voice was full of careful wonder. "The Lady Marvane, my king. She has not moved." Kale lifted his head. He looked. Lady Marvane was still standing in front of her chair. Her face had gone the color of the snow outside. She had not run. She had not fought. She was looking at Sayana with an expression Sayana could not at first name, and then Sayana understood. It was the look of a woman who had spent 15 years building a careful, patient ladder and had reached the top of it and had found that the roof was not where she had thought. "Take her," Kyle said quietly. "Take all of them. The judgment will wait until we are home. Bind her hands with iron, not silver." The men of his guard moved. Lady Marvane did not resist. The ride back to Hollowreach took 6 days because they took it slowly. Cale would not let her on a horse for the first 2. She rode in a covered wagon with Marisol and Maven, and Marisol leaned against her shoulder for most of the first day, and then began, on the second, to ask small, careful questions, and Sayana answered them as best she could. About their father, she did not yet say everything. There would be time. On the 3rd day, Sayana rode again, beside Kael, and the silver in her wrist had quieted to a steady, warm hum that no longer frightened her. Maven rode behind them and watched her with the face of a woman who had spent 60 years waiting for a thing and could finally begin to set the waiting down. The judgments at Hollowreach took 2 weeks. Lady Marvane was stripped of her name and her lands and confined to a stone tower on the western coast for the rest of her natural life, with no visitors, no correspondence, and no further part in the politics of the kingdom. She did not speak at her trial. She watched Sayana from the dock with the same flat expression she had worn in the hall, and when the judgment was given, she only inclined her head once, the same gracious gesture, and was led away. Lord Hadron of House Selverin was found in a small village 3 days' ride from his estate, attempting to reach a port. He was returned to Hollowreach in chains. Sayana asked to be allowed to attend his judgment. Kael asked her, only once, if she was certain. She said she was. She sat in the gallery with her sister beside her, and she watched her father be stripped of his lands and his title. And when the sentence of exile to the far western islands was read, her father looked up into the gallery and met her eyes. She did not look away. He did. After a long moment he did. Varric Thorn was tried separately, for the assault on the king at the pavilion, and for the conspiracy against the throne. He was given the same sentence as Lord Hadron. The Iron Coast passed, by the king's order, to Varric's younger brother, a quiet man who had taken no part in the conspiracy, and who arrived at Hollowreach 3 weeks later to swear his oath in person. The kingdom, slowly, began to settle. Marisol was given rooms in the royal wing and a tutor, and the run of the gardens, and within a month her face had begun to fill out, and her laugh had begun to come back. And Sayana found her one afternoon teaching Lyrian a card game she had made up at their aunt's house when she was 8. Maven moved into a chamber 2 doors from Kayana's, and the records room of Hollowreach acquired a second working table. In the spring, Kayana and Kael were married in the small chapel of the fortress with no ceremony beyond the witness of Maven, Dorian, Marisol, and the 7 captains of the king's guard. They had agreed on this together. Sayana had stood once in front of 1,000 wolves. She did not need to do it again. The bond, complete now, did not fade with the seasons. It deepened. Some nights, Sayana woke to find Kael already awake beside her, reading by candlelight, and she would know without looking that his thoughts were on a piece of trade law. And he would know without looking that she was awake, and he would set the paper down and they would not need to speak. The silver in her wrist had become a soft, constant warmth, the temperature of a hand laid gently against her skin, and she could not remember any more what it had been like to live without it. In the autumn of her first year at Hollowreach, she asked Maven to begin teaching her properly. Not the politics. The other thing. The light. There were old books in the records room, books her mother-in-law had collected and never had the chance to use, and Sayana opened the first of them on a gray afternoon with the rain against the window, and Maven sat across the table from her and smiled the way an old gardener smiles when a long-planted seed at last shows green. She learned to call the silver and to set it down. She learned to weave wards into the stones of the fortress. She learned the small healings first and then the larger ones. By the second winter, the people of Hollowreach had begun to come quietly to a side door of the records room with their fevers and their wounds and their silent griefs, and Sayana, who had been raised for a marriage that would have killed her, began to learn what her hands had been made for. She did not forget the pavilion. Some nights, on the high terrace above the inland sea, she would stand with Kale's arm around her shoulders and look out at the dark water, and she would remember the silver cord on her wrists, and the smell of jasmine and burning oil, and the small word no that had cracked her whole life open. "Are you sorry?" he asked her once, late, with the stars very thick above them. "For what?" "For any of it. The road, the keep, the fire." She thought about it. She thought about her sister asleep in a warm room 2 corridors away. She thought about Maven's smile in the records room. She thought about the steady, warm hum in her wrist that was the heart of the man whose arm was around her shoulders. "No," she said, "for none of it." He pressed his lips to the top of her head. Far below them, on the dark sea, a fisherman's lantern moved slowly toward the harbor. Somewhere in the fortress, a bell rang the late hour. The wind off the inland sea was cold, and the silver in her wrist was warm, and the long climb that had begun on a black cliff 6 years before he had ever laid eyes on her was, at last, only the path home. She turned her face up to his. "Climb faster," she said, and she was smiling. He laughed. The laugh was the laugh she had heard in the silver. It had been waiting for her all along,